Welcome. We are back again. This is week 2 of the Mom Ramp series. It's a funny thing as a dad and as a guy to be having a series about motherhood. And I want to tell you real frankly, I'm not speaking, as you may know, from the position of a mom, but I have gotten so much out of the last couple weeks. I'm excited to wrap this up today. However, listen, tonight at 8 p.m., if you're watching this online, tonight at 8 p.m., this is going live on May 15th. But if it ever gets replayed, same will probably be true. Sunday nights at 8 p.m., Jacob and I have been doing the live Q&A on Facebook, and we've loved it. And so I'm going to intentionally today, I'll leave some questions unanswered. I have some questions that I would like to present without answers, which is, if you're ever speaking to a church, that's the first thing is don't leave unanswered questions. But I want to do some of that. If you're taking notes, jump on with us tonight. Okay, we're going to go to 1 Samuel chapter 1. Elkanah had 2 wives, Hannah and Peninnah. Peninnah had children, but Hannah did not. Big deal back in the day to not have children. We mention it lightly because it's something that we're familiar with. We know people who just choose to not have children, but in the day, her not having children was no small thing. Verse 3, each year, Elkanah would travel to Shiloh to worship and sacrifice to the Lord of heaven's armies and the tabernacle. The priests of the Lord at that time were the 2 sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas. On the days Elkanah presented his sacrifice, he would give portions of meat to Peninnah and to each of her children. And though he loved Hannah, he would give her only one choice portion because the Lord had given her no children. Lots of symbolism, a lot of tradition going on here. Don't get lost in the details. Basically, it was an embarrassing time for Hannah. Hannah would go to the temple, and it was like this painful reminder that she was not able to bear children. And this other wife, Elkanah's other wife, was. Though he loved Hannah very much, he would only give her one choice portion because the Lord had given her no children. So Peninnah would taunt Hannah and make fun of her because the Lord had kept her from having children. Year after year, it was the same. Peninnah would taunt Hannah as they would go to the tabernacle. Each time, Hannah would be reduced to tears and would not even eat. Why are you crying, Hannah? Sounds like a husband. What's up? What's the big deal? Elkanah would ask, why aren't you eating? Why be downhearted just because you have no children? You have me. Isn't that better than having 10 sons? Is it comforting to know that some family dynamics never change? Verse 9, once after sacrificial meal at Shiloh, Hannah got up and went to pray. Eli the priest was sitting in his customary place beside the entrance of the tabernacle. Hannah was in deep anguish, crying bitterly as she prayed to the Lord, and she made this vow. Okay, we're going to get to that in just a second. Talked about it last week that it doesn't take much observing to realize that biology is not stacked equally as far as reproduction, as far as children. It's not stacked equally at all. I mean, when you look at the physical tax of being a mother versus the physical tax of being a father, the two are not even close. The duration of being a mother and then to have that added on to by being the source of life for that child for its early years. To talk about motherhood in casual terms is not fair, but what we're seeing from Hannah is that the only thing worse than the suffering that comes from being a mom was the suffering that came from being unable to be a mom. It's funny because even with all the suffering that's attached to the plight or the story of motherhood, it's also where the most loving, greatest examples of love, I mean, you see so much sacrifice. So it's this weird yin and yang relationship between a mother and a child and the pain and the suffering and the love and the fulfillment and all of the things that go along with that. John 16 says it this way, real quick. This is not what the sermon's about, but just side note. John 16:21 says, a woman giving birth to a child has pain because her time has come. But when her baby is born, she forgets the anguish because of her joy that a child is born into this world. It's describing this pain and this joy and this relationship between the two. So I want to look at Hannah real quick, and a couple of key points is to help set up Hannah's suffering and just the crushing that she was experiencing is that commoners in the Bible didn't have multiple wives. It actually doesn't say anywhere that God approved of this practice. It doesn't say that Elkanah had 2 wives and God was like, nice. It doesn't mention approval at all. It just mentions that it was. In the Bible, you got to remember that just because it's in the Bible does not mean it has this rubber stamp. But it wasn't common for commoners to have multiple wives. And so for Elkanah to have 2 wives, what that means is he had married Hannah. He loved her very much. She was unable to have children. And so The additional wife, Peninnah, came in as a secondary, as a replacement, someone who was fertile, where the family could be, pursued. So Hannah, not only was she unable to fulfill what she had hoped for as a mother in her own life, she's now subjected to this situation in her home where there's multiple wives, and she's the subservient one. She's the underneath one. She doesn't get the full portion. The family portion at temple. Church even had become this painful place of suffering. The temple was this reminder of all of the suffering that she was experiencing in her life, and not having a child had even wrecked her home life. It's a mom story. It's the Mom Ramp series, but this is not, I don't want to look at this from a biological standpoint. If we could take a deep breath and take a big pause here, here's what I would like to do. I would like to try to put ourselves in her position, because I know we can think of it, well, it's a mom. She's going through her mom stuff. Families, we know our moms. Okay. And it's almost, crazy as it sounds, it's almost like we have a habit or a pattern of dismissing mom's problems. But if you think of it this way, as an individual who was crushed, and not just crushed, but like deeply soul crushed, and yet when you read ahead in her story, in the story of Hannah, within her is held the greatest judge Israel would maybe ever know. Within her future, it's like there's potential and there's crushing. Maybe I'd say it this way. Maybe this is Mom Ramp week 2. The title would be Crushing Potential. I think the reason it's not a mom story is everybody can relate to this moment of feeling like I'm capable of more. There's so much more potential. I wonder if I'll ever get to fully, spread my wings to their full length. I think this. I feel like that I relate to Hannah in my own life, and I feel like that we kind of all will. I feel like I best relate to Hannah when I can't see the potential, when I don't know what the future holds, when I don't know what God's up to, but I feel the crushing. I think that was, I know that I've had this conversation with God where I said, God, if you're not going to do something in my life, if you're not going to use me for something, take away this sense of ambition. Take away this sense of drive and just let me be okay. Just let me be fulfilled in where I'm at. And it was like that the presence of potential was part of the crushing. And I know that in Hannah's life, she didn't understand that fully. There's no way she could have understood that fully, but it's like she felt potential. She, within her story, holds the potential for greatness, and yet she's being mocked within her own home. John 12, if we're going to try to take apart this crushing potential, if we're going to try to understand how that looks in our own lives, let's go to John chapter 12, verse 24. It says, very truly, I tell you, unless a kernel of wheat falls into the ground and dies, it remains only a single seed. But if it dies, it produces many seeds. I know what it feels like to negotiate with God. I know what that feels like, to feel desperate, to feel like that you're so tired of the suffering and the discomfort. I know what it feels like to offer God one of these, like, if you will, then I will sort of things. C.S. Lewis said it, I think it's so brilliant, that if God granted all of my silly prayers I'd prayed in my life, then where would I be? Where would I be now? In reality, when you get to the negotiating with God, like, okay, God, if you'll just let me have this, or if you'll let me have that. And then you read John chapter 12, and it says, unless the kernel goes into the ground and fully dies and breaks apart and is completely crushed, then the life of what it's capable of, the DNA of that wheat that could be life-giving and spring up and become a plant, those things, those kinds of opportunities in our lives are never realized without the crushing first. I think sometimes we want to skip straight to the comfort, and we would even surrender future potential if it meant current comfort. And what God is saying is, I'm not going to negotiate with you. I'm not going to negotiate the terms of your comfort. I'm just going to go through the crushing process with you. When I feel all the crushing of my plans or my dreams, when I've been through seasons, because let me just be completely honest. I think sometimes I feel crushed when I see the potential of the kingdom. This happens in my own life. I mean, at an individual level, I get frustrated with myself when it feels like I'm not living up to my potential, but I see the same thing in the kingdom when I see people that just attend church. That's it. Their whole kingdom concept is, I attend a church, and more, I attend a big church where I feel very safe, that lots of us are doing the same thing. And I'm like, there's a crushing that I sense of like, there's so much potential. There's so much potential within each individual kernel of wheat. Everybody is this potential. It's like that Robert Schuller quote that says, everybody can count the seeds in an apple, but only God can count the apples in the seed. And I think sometimes we forget that we are burdened with potential. We are burdened with fertility. We are burdened with the opportunity for greatness. And I say burdened because if we're not careful, we surrender that because we just want comfort. And when I feel that crushing, my requests are almost always attempting to alleviate the discomfort. Think about the things you've asked God for in your life. Go back over the best you can remember, all the things you've ever asked God for. Most of the time, what you're asking for is a more comfortable now, not a bigger tomorrow. And maybe Hannah is there. I can't say, I suspect not, but maybe we could say that Hannah was there where she was trying to negotiate with God. But I think what she was feeling is this kernel of wheat starting to break apart. Something within her it was like something was dying in her. It was breaking apart from the inside. I know there's got to be somebody listening going, I think that's what I'm going through in my life, is that this kernel of wheat that's breaking us and we're dying and we can't explain it. It just feels like we're being crushed from the inside out. Okay, I got to get back to this. My computers. I think it is interesting this, that the deep anguish and hurt and the breaking apart and the crushing and the agony that we know that Hannah was going through was a catalyst. It was the cause. Can I even say this? That sense of crushing was the cause for that last verse that we read. It was the shoehorn that brought her from where she was to where God was taking her. It was the suffering. It was the crushing. It was this anguish. It was this anxiety. It was all of those things that God used for that verse in verse 10. When Hannah was in deep anguish, crying bitterly as she prayed to the Lord, she made this vow, a vow she would not have made otherwise. She makes a promise that she would not have otherwise made except for the suffering and the breaking apart and this process of dying to become something new. O Lord of heaven's armies, if you will look upon my sorrow and answer my prayer and give me a son, I will give him back to you. He will be yours for his entire lifetime. And as a sign that he's been dedicated to the Lord, his hair will never be cut. That's a Nazirite vow if you want to look it up. I really don't think this is Hannah making a deal with God or negotiating with God. I think what we're seeing is the acceptance of a death. I think what we're seeing is somebody pushed so far there's no peace in my home. There's no peace in my marriage. I can't go to church and find peace. I can't be okay. I can't find my okayness. And the thing I thought would make things better just keeps not happening. This one thing I placed all my hopes and dreams on continues to not happen. It was like she almost, like you could say that she was negotiating with God. But even if that's the case, that's not what triggered God's movement in this story. Let's make sure we don't miss that. Even if it was God or Hannah negotiating with God, I would say that it's not, but even if it was, it's not the negotiation that triggers God's activity in her life. That's not the thing that started to grow sprouts. That's not the thing that caused Hannah to go from a kernel of wheat into a fertile plant. Stick with me. God, real quick, God doesn't need deals. That's why they don't work. If you're in that place of like, all right, God, make you a deal. God's like, I don't need your deal. I don't need it. Here's what triggers God that the death of the old is complete and it's ready for the new life. Listen, it's her promising to take seriously the hardest, most difficult part of her story. It's when Hannah surrenders her deepest held, most valued goal and dream in her life. When she finally says, I will surrender my dream of being a mother. I will give him back to you. I will surrender what you have in my story. I will surrender it. I will give it back to you if I can participate in a meaningful way. I will say this. Those types of vows, and she obviously meant it. She follows up on it. We're going to read that in a second. But those sorts of vows are not made. They're not cooked in a microwave. That's not a 30 seconds, hot on the outside, cold on the inside thing that we're reading. What we're reading from Hannah is something that has slowly marinated over time, something that is slowly saturated. It is like days long Thanksgiving meal prep type of a vow that is clear to her core. She is saying it would be more meaningful to me to have a son that I give back than to get to raise my children in the way that I'm seeing Peninnah get to do. It's a surrender. Oh, there's a lot here. Let's hope we can get it. One of the things that we see is that Hannah's internal dialogue, we see what her internal dialogue had been based on her external actions. What I mean by that is it would be so easy to be like, why can't I have a kid? Why can't I have a kid? What's going on? Why can't I have a kid? And get mad at God and get bitter and become this bitter person, someone that her husband didn't love anymore. It would be so easy to see her turn on the other wife in the house. It would be so easy to see her picking, oh, I don't deserve this. What did I do? She's not even a good person. I'm a good person. Ever been there? I'm a good person. Why do they keep getting what I'm praying for? I keep doing this. They keep doing that. It would have been so easy for somebody in Hannah's position to get bitter and turn on God and go, I hope if you give me a kid, I'll never tell him about you. But instead, what we see is her internal dialogue. She's going, God is a good God. He's powerful. He's capable. I don't know what's going on. But her internal dialogue, the conversations that she's having with herself, please don't miss this. The conversations that she's having with herself keep drawing her back into a God of potential, a God of potential. I said one time in my own life, I felt like I'd been strapped to a roller coaster and I was like, okay, God, I'm going with you. Here we go. And God just instantly takes it underwater. And I'm like, what are you doing? I can't breathe under here. But I'm strapped to this roller coaster and it seems like I'm so far underwater in all of my hopes and dreams and things that I wanted. And I had this choice. I could unbuckle. I could give up. I could be like, no, I'm out. I quit. But then I'm underwater. And then what am I going to do? It was almost as though God, in all of his magnificent wisdom, encourages me with, hey, I'm the only one that can get you back to the surface. You might as well just buckle up and see where I'm taking it. And what you see in Hannah is this continual holding onto the roller coaster going, God, it's crushing me. I'm breaking apart. You don't understand everything I thought I would be. I'm not everywhere I thought I was going. I'm not going. I don't know what to do, but I'm still here. Suffering can bring you through seasons of resentment. So if you've ever been mad at God or frustrated at God, listen, you're not alone. It goes through seasons of resentment. But what Hannah is showing on the outside was what she had determined on the inside. She had determined that whether she liked it or not, her only hope in life was going to be God anyway. Listen, Samuel was going to be the result of this. Samuel would go on to be a judge, one of the greatest judges in history of Israel, a priest, a prophet. He would install the first two kings. It was Samuel, the result of what we're talking about. Samuel would be the one that installed the first two kings, King Saul, King David. He's the only ghost mentioned in the Bible. Fun fact. What was it? What was it that caused Samuel to move in this story from suffering to greatness? What was the catalyst that activated the story of barrenness into the story of fertility? And here it is. If you look upon my sorrow and answer my prayer and give me a son, I will give him back to you. There's a reason we talk about giving in church. Time, effort, caring. There's a reason we talk about giving, and the reason we talk about giving is it's what keeps things from having a hold on us. The thing that you're the least likely to give away is the thing that is most likely to have a hold on you. Please pause. The thing that you hold on to the tightest is the thing that is most likely got a hold on your life. You are most likely suffering bondage from the thing you're the least likely to give away. That could literally be the whole sermon. It's always interesting as a pastor when you look at the percentage of people who financially support a church, how low it is. Remember I said the suffering, the crushing that I feel sometimes. I feel like I'm Hannah when I look around at people who are going through the motions, but they're not giving themselves to anything. They're not dedicating themselves to anything. They're living in bondage. And I'm using money as an example, and I know everybody hates talking about money, but I wonder sometimes if the thing that we're the least likely to give away is the thing that's most likely to have a control on our lives. Think about Hannah's position here. One baby would have kept her husband from marrying another woman. Give me one kid. One kid. God, just give me one kid. Nope. Suffering. Her husband marries another wife. Don't you think that one baby would have saved her years of mockery and grief and heartache. Don't you think it would have been very easy for Hannah to say, if only I had a son, I would be okay. Don't miss what I'm saying. If only I had blank, I could be happy if blank. Wipe the slate clean, dry the erase board in your mind just for a second. When you say, I could be okay if, and you draw a line, whatever you fill into that blank is your idol. It's the thing that you use to replace God in your life. It's common to man. I'm not picking on you. I'm saying anybody. The one, when we go, my life would be complete if blank, there's your idol. It would have been so easy for Hannah to go, I'm okay. I'm good. I got a baby. I'm fine. My husband's only got one wife. I don't have to compete. I'm great. No mockery, no suffering, no Peninnah. God is so good at identifying in our lives when things have the potential to move from good to ultimate. When something moves to ultimate good in our lives and takes over its place as an idol in our lives, this thing we replace with God, when God is so good at knowing in advance when something's going to do that and keeping us from it. I think God saw the potential in who Samuel was going to become, and he wanted to plant that in fertile soil of life, and it said that, we've got some preparation to do. And so in Hannah, he allows her season of suffering to prepare her to become the soil that would launch Samuel into a life of ministry. It doesn't mention Peninnah's kids. Says she was kind of a rip. Her kids were probably Ricky Bobby's kids. No, I'm just being ugly. I don't know. But God was doing something special. God was doing something unique in the life of Hannah and through the life of Samuel. God was up to something very special, very unique, and he took very extra precaution to make sure that a child didn't move from good to the ultimate. And what was the difference? The difference was willingness to give back. If you're not giving, look around. I mean, we get defensive quick. Oh, here we go. It's the money talk. It's the money talk. It's the time talk. It's the generosity talk. It's the emotional talk. It's everything that you withhold has a hold on you. Everything that you withhold has a hold on you. If you are attending a church and you're not participating in it, means there's something that's got a higher place on the ladder in your life. And I don't want to cheapen what I'm talking about with Hannah, because I think that's really the truth of this message. But it was when Hannah said, I'm not going to let that have a hold on my life. I will give it back. When she said, I will give it back, it triggered life in her. God, I will give it back. If you will trust me to be a conduit, I will participate in the story. And it's what triggered suffering into potential, into life. Sometimes it seems like real miracles, the real deepest miracles, aren't seen in a moment. There's a painter, his name is Monet, and you may or may not know that name, but Monet, when he would paint, if you got too close to it, if you got up too close, it just looked like splotches of paint. It was just kind of a mess. And so maybe when we edit this, I don't know if there'd be a way to get one of these pictures in there or not. It'd be cool if we could. Jacob's give me the, I don't know what the copyright laws are. Anyway. But Monet, when you look at this, it's just splotches of paint. It's just this ugly mess of just colors everywhere until you get back far enough away from it. When you get back far enough away from it, it's like your eyes focus and you go, oh, it's a beautiful picture made up of splotches. And I think sometimes in our lives, we get so focused on the one little detail and we judge whether we're going to cling to this, we hold to this, and we just suck the life out of our picture because we don't trust that the author or the painter or the artist is up to something bigger in our lives. And so our focus is how to alleviate the suffering instead of how to see that suffering be the catalyst to see something even greater. Unless a kernel falls into the ground and breaks apart, it's over. I think sometimes we're so busy duct taping the kernel back together that we're not seeing the life that's available. We miss our on-ramp. I don't do this very often. I actually, I don't know if I've ever done this. You don't really end a sermon with a warning. Usually, like, you issue the warning, you think about it, you wrap up, everybody goes home happy. That was a great sermon. You end it with a warning, everybody kind of walks out like, ugh. Hannah commits, okay, I'm gonna give him back to you. When he's weaned, he goes back to the temple. He's raised in service of God. He goes on to become just one of my all-time favorite characters in the Bible, the story of Samuel. He's such a fascinating person. And when God calls him into ministry, when God grabs him and takes Samuel into the on-ramp into his life of ministry. He calls his name twice, Samuel, Samuel. He is one of only 8 in the entire Bible to be referenced by name twice, back to back like that. That's a whole cool series. But Samuel, Samuel, and it says this in 1 Samuel verse 3, it says in verse 11, and the Lord said to Samuel, see, I'm about to do something in Israel that will make the ears of everyone who hears about it tingle. This is Samuel. He's a child. He's about to be launched into this life of ministry. His mom has gone through this tremendous sacrifice. She's made good on her end of the deal. She is now on the sideline observing as God takes Samuel and runs with it. She's living in giving. I didn't mean for that to rhyme, but you'll probably remember that she is living in giving. Anyway, God takes over and says, verse 12, at that time, I will carry out against Eli. Remember, Eli was in the temple. He was the one that thought she was drunk. He sees her pray and thinks she's drunk. If you think that the priests of the temple can't get jaded, he's like, another drunk. I hear that and I'm like, boy, ministry it can bring out the worst. It can bring out the most suspicious, the most jaded. Anyway, he was in the temple at the time. He was overseeing he was one of the judges of Israel. It says, I will carry out against Eli everything I spoke about against his family from beginning to end, for I have told him that I would judge his family forever because of the sin he knew about. Remember Hophni and Phinehas, the kids that were in charge of the temple, his sons that were in charge of the temple. His sons blasphemed God, and he failed to restrain them. Therefore I swore to the house of Eli, the guilt of Eli's house will never be atoned for by sacrifice or offering. It's a chiasm in a sense. God, if you will, then I'll give you my children. And then Eli says, I won't give you my children. I'm going to protect them, and it's death. I mean, it's this life and death in this relationship. And what's so interesting to me is that Eli reserved for himself something more important than God's approval, and the result of it was death. It is like the exact opposite of Hannah, who suffered so greatly and so deeply and so worth it, the results that suffering created. And the warning was Eli that said, I can't, God, you're asking for too much, and the result was death. And it was the giving. I used to think that giving was this. I used to think of giving as taking and handing it off, and I don't think that way anymore. I think that giving is when you open your hand and you go, God, you take what is yours, and help me to love whatever you leave that you say is mine. Don't let me cling to my finances. Don't let me cling to my relationships. Don't let me cling to my wife. Don't let me cling to my kids or my job or my occupation. God, I'm going to will myself. I'm going to discipline myself. Teach me how to live with an open hand so that I'm not holding on to bondage, so that I'm not holding on to slavery, so that I'm not holding on to something that's holding me back. Don't let me be the one that holds to something for the wrong reasons and never gets to experience that death and that new life, becoming a kernel of wheat that goes into the ground, that dies, death and new life that comes with it. God, don't let me hold on to anything too tightly. Let me live my life with an open hand. You take what's yours, you leave what's mine, and teach me to give back. Teach me to be a giver. Shiloh, we are givers. It's in our DNA. Look at the Firewood Project. Look at the 1017. Everything that we do, Lacey and I, we give. It is in our DNA. If you understand the life of what it means to be a part of this kingdom mind, if our goal is that we want to live as a kingdom community, it is giving. And when you don't give, it's like you're holding on to something just outside the door and trying to peek in of what it would be like. And I'm telling you, whatever you hold too tightly, relationships, finances, personal will, I'm not going to give up that, or I'm not going to do that. What you're doing is you're holding on to this and you're never experiencing the life that's available. It's like we stay patching up our little kernel of wheat, trying to reserve the life in it. And what God's saying is when you let it die, it was when Hannah said, I will give up on the dream that I had of motherhood if you will let me live in the kingdom. And God says, I will give you one of the greatest legacies. You will be the soil from which one of the greatest legacies in the Bible springs from, because it's the soil of generosity and giving and willingness to participate and willingness to suffer. Listen, willingness to suffer now for something better later. That is the soil that produced Samuel. It's the on-ramp. It's the off-ramp. It says, I'm going to suffer now so I can understand. It's an investment into who God wants me to be. It's that suffering that I wouldn't have chosen, that I couldn't have done without. Let's pray. Lord, as we think of suffering and giving as fertility, I wonder how many times, God, we're going through fertility issues. And I don't mean a child. Look, I know that there are people that go through fertility and you take their story a different route, but the truth of the story is still the same. That God, when we die to the original plans that we had for ourselves, God, it's like a kernel of wheat that dies, and we are so free, open-handed free to experience who you want us to be, who you want us to become. God, do not give up on us if we are not givers. Don't let it go. Don't let that potential go. Lord, let the potential crush us, that we know we're capable of more. We know we're capable of doing more or being more. And God, it's that potential that causes us to feel crushed until we eventually accept that the crushing isn't from the outside getting in. God, the crushing that's taking place is from the inside trying to get out. God, there is life in us trying to get out. I pray this, that with our generosity and our spirit of who we are, that as we become generous people, the life breaks out and become something better than we could have done with ourselves. Pray in Jesus' name, amen.